Hello, everyone. Thank you for watching this special episode of Really Dicey. This is Manny, and I'm here with.
Hi, everybody. I'm Zoe, and I'm from the Writer's Room, a Seventh Sea podcast. And I am also called the narrator for 10 Quills Dice, which specializes in D10 resin dice.
Hi, I'm Stephanie. I am a player on Bits Before Crits, which runs a lot of different RPGs, and our game master for 7th Sea for a couple of seasons has been Michael.
And
so
hi, I'm
him.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Michael. I am also a participant in the Bits Before Crits podcast, which, yes, again, does a lot of mostly rules light RPG modules, and they allowed me to run 7th Sea both as a podcast and also as a Twitch stream recently.
Excellent. So, viewers, you're wondering, why did I assemble these great thespians to talk about 7th Sea? Well, it's because we are going to talk about 7th Sea, Nations of Theah, particularly Volume One. I didn't want to do a typical review of a book. I didn't want a dry segment, because this book is way too exciting for that, in my opinion. Or all the books are too exciting for that. So I figured today we'll just kind of talk about the 4 major nations that this book covers, and kind of talk about, you know, what inspires us, what have you played using these nations, and so forth. Here's my first question. Let's look at Avalon. Avalon's a very interesting, well, probably one of my favorite. That's because I've always been a fan of King Arthur and all things Fae. Have any of you used Avalon for your stories?
I'm over here nodding my head enthusiastically because one of my players, Wayland Greywall, is from Avalon, and a lot of their backstory is dealing with Queen Elaine and dealing with the Sidhe, Sidhe, meaning as in like the Unseelie and Seelie courts, the Fae, and it is. I love it. It's everything that I love about Arthurian legends and about the Shakespearean lore of Midsummer Night. I get a lot of that from there, and then also my world. I pulled a lot from the Dresden Files and how they portray the fairy realms. So like my Mab and my Titania, for example, are very much reminiscent of ones that you would find in Dresden Files. It's just a glamorous place, and it's not just totally not the UK. It's also totally not Scotland and totally not Ireland. So it's that whole thing, and all of it is great.
I would love to add from a player's perspective that everything you just mentioned is also absolutely terrifying as a player. Like, to see these Fae characters come in and know, like, have a surface knowledge of like Fae lore in general. There's going to be rules, there's going to be catches, there's going to be like really intricate, fun details to uncover as a player. So it's really fun to interact with Avalon NPCs and like lore and plot.
Yeah, we have a lot of Avalonian NPCs that my players have interacted with, and this very recently we do have 2 players from Avalon, one from Avalon proper, who is a sailor who's very obsessed with Queen Elaine, and so that's been a lot of fun to play with. And then my other character is from Innismore, who has some glamour abilities, so I've been kind of touching into some of the Arthurian legends and some of the Fae work, and they've definitely encountered the Fae before, which I completely agree with you. It was both fun, and also I agree with Stephanie, but also terrifying, because that's why you call them the good folk, because you don't want to make them mad.
I love that you mentioned the Dresden Files. I haven't. Now that you mentioned that, that makes total sense for that to be a source of inspiration. For me, it's Stardust. I always, when I think of this world, I think of Stardust, and it's because Stardust, for those who haven't seen the movie, it's just once you go past that wall or in that wall or something like that, there's pirates and sky capturing lightning and all these other really fun captures really the what I felt like the essence of what the Fae are. Do any of you use any other outside inspiration to help flesh out this setting?
Well, I don't want to directly speak for Stephanie, but she and I have a lot of performance history working at Renaissance festivals. So we draw a lot of Elizabethan England history. And obviously Queen Elaine is very much inspired by Elizabeth I. So a lot of that politics is very fun to play with. And obviously the dealings with between pirate / privateer and that whole thing between nations has always been very exciting. So I'd say a lot of history knowledge is thrown in.
Along those same lines over here, I did live over in Europe for a little while. And so I got to visit the castles and really delve into the old world. And a lot of my lore comes from Arthurian legend and all of those ancient kind of, beliefs of, Merlin was a real person and magic is real. Things like that. And so a lot of my Avalon and a lot of, Innismore and even the Highland Marches, that all is very real. And I always tell my players, names have meaning, they have power. And I don't just say that to say it. I mean, like, really watch what you're naming because they might be listening.
Was there anything in Avalon that you enjoyed the most using when it came to your stories that you made?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So there is an old poem. It's mostly Germanic, but it's about the Earl King. And the Earl King is the master of the hunt. And in multiple pieces of literature, he is always depicted as this lord of the hunt. And a lot of actually The Witcher is based off of the Wild Hunt, which is led by the Earl King. And I took all of that lore and I took all of the lore involving the Sidhe and I melded them together. And I have, there's Titania and there's Oberon, but in my world, there's Titania, who is the queen of summer. There's Mab, who's the queen of winter. There's the Earl King, the king of fall, and Oberon, the king of spring. And so they all kind of work together and everything is season based. And like, I just really love Avalon. Avalon is second only to me to Eisen, but we're not going to talk about Eisen. Unfortunately, that's in volume 2.
Yeah. So very recently I went through some folklore from Irish folklore. So I went into dipping into some Innismore stuff, and I actually had taken some tales of the Dullahan, or the haunted armor, the headless horseman, and very, very popular. It actually was a tale back in Ireland before it was a story down over here in colonial America. But very similar. Like I looked at like where its origins were, its intent. I very easily tied it to the good folk, and sort of like that the magic is there between the two. And Stephanie could speak to like encountering a creature like that.
All right, excellent. Is there anything about Avalon that you want to share before we jump into Castile?
Actually, yeah, I do really enjoy the lore behind the rulers. A lot of these nations we're going to talk about have kind of this knife's edge of, it could end up in turmoil, it could not. And it's based a lot around who is ruling the nation. And the way how they portrayed Queen Elaine is she got her power from the Grail. And as long as she has the Grail, she has the power to control the throne. And the Grail was given to her as a gift after she went into the Fey lands to either the way how it's written is it's very ambiguous. There's just enough meat for any player or any GM to grasp onto, but then you flavor it with all of your own. And so, my Avalon is going to be very different from the Bits and Crits Avalon. But they're all from the same, I love their world already just from them talking about it. And I'm going to go follow Bits and Crits as soon as we're done with this. But I really enjoy how they portray Queen Elaine, and that, yes, she is a young ruler, but she is trying to not only marry the people of Avalon, but also the good folk, because we're all in this together and she's just trying to make her way in the world. And I really enjoy that about Avalon.
Yeah, I think Avalon is like particularly rich because everyone like has in their like cultural zeitgeist some perception of like Fae lore and King Arthur like somewhere knocking around their brains. So even if you just get like your players bringing their perceptions to the world, like for me, I just I'm a princess performer, so I just played Tinkerbell. So I watched all 6 of the Tinkerbell films. The fairy lore in the Tinkerbell films surprisingly good. And like when you were talking about the seasons and the different rulers, I was like, I just saw that in Tinkerbell. I'm gonna bring that. My character is gonna bring that to my next game. So it's so cool how many Dresden Files just like you can really Avalon is such a beautiful, beautiful mesh.
I completely agree. And yeah, just to piggyback on that, just like yeah, the politics is just so exciting because like it could tip either way because of the Grail and like even like not just the good folk, but also the Highland Marshes and Innismore, which are your fantasy Ireland and Scotland, are only loyal because Queen Elaine has the Grail. That's the only reason they don't start a war. That's the only reason they're loyal. And so it's like it's such a huge thing. So that's such a great offer for both GMs and as well as players to mess with.
That and the O'Bannon really digs Queen Elaine, and so you know,
who doesn't love a Mad King?
Who doesn't love a Mad King?
All right, so let's talk about Castile. Now, personally, I always find Castile to be a difficult nation to introduce to players because I think in at least in American like media, like films and books, there's not too much examples of like Spanish like mythology in a sense. You know, I mean, the closest thing is Don Quixote, but even then, Don Quixote is a very complicated work. But I'm curious. When it comes to this section, what are your thoughts about it? What inspirations did you go to?
It's funny you bring up Don Quixote because I love the story of Don Quixote, and I also love everything that I've used from Castile. Mainly, the main stuff that I used was not just the tale of Don Quixote, which they have their own sort of Don Quixote-esque character in their lore, but they also obviously you have one of the best antagonists you can throw at your players comes from their Inquisition, and people like, and as Stephanie said, like this is zeitgeist. People know like the Inquisition, whether you know it from from Mel Brooks comedies or if you know it from reading Three Musketeers, the Inquisition and the Cardinal, such great villains to pull and ideas to pull from. And you have the Vatican City, and you have all of that beautiful place to explore, which thankfully, Steph and I have been to the Vatican City before, so I had that visual in my head to kind of really paint word pictures for the players. And I very much love Castile for the beauty it has, and also all of the rules and obstacles that they present.
Yeah, to piggyback off of that, my Castile is based entirely off of the romantic idea that I have of Spain, of it is just a siesta all the time. Everybody's happy. Everybody's dancing. There's music no matter where you go. Everything's super ridiculously colorful, and the people are so generous and nice. But then you've got that dark side, that Inquisition, where you have the religious zealots. And, you know, if you're not Vatican, you get looked upon differently. And sometimes you get taken in the middle of the night and no one knows where you go. You know, it's that mystery about it, that romance and everything that I just love. I never got to visit Spain, unfortunately, but it's on my bucket list. And my Castile is very much this beautiful Spain that I think it is.
Have you ever made characters from this section? Have you used NPCs from this section? What tools have you used?
So my Spain, we have a campaign in which I do have a Spanish player. He's playing a duelist, and I have several villains that are part of the Inquisition that are trying to eradicate magic, because that's what the Inquisition does. It's like, we don't like science and we don't like magic, so we're going to get rid of it, and we don't care how. So the villain is very much your typical like religious zealot of no magic, no science whatsoever. If it's not Vatican, it doesn't exist. And so I've got them hounding that. And then Cardinal Verdugo, which is a big villain in Castile in the book, this older mastermind, very much akin to the cardinal in the Three Musketeers. He runs the church. He is the face of the church, but he doesn't go out and do villainous things. He lets other people do that. And that's how I run him. I took the Three Musketeers and I was like, I like this and how they portrayed him. This is my Cardinal Verdugo. He is elderly. He is conniving, and he is a capital V villain. And he has all of these strings everywhere, but you can't pin it on him because he is smart.
Diplomatic immunity.
Yes, diplomatic immunity. Also, God says it's okay.
Yep. Yeah, I've used Castile as a great place for my players to actually they've pulled a heist before in Castile, and there was stealing of going into a museum. There was a fake exorcism. There was a lot of hilarity that ensued. And right now we also currently have a Castilian priest in our party, one of our players, who's really exploring the faith of the Castilian, like being both a passionate member of society, but also questioning the methods of the church and the Inquisition. So that's been very fun to dive into that lore a bit more.
You played a Castilian character too when we were playing another campaign too, that I really enjoyed that character. Castilians seem to be like, it's such a good like binary almost of like the getting to explore faithfulness versus the methods of it. And most times I've seen like player characters, they've really been kind of on like a great character arc of self-discovery of like where they came from versus where they want to be, that the lore is really rich for letting the character find out like what faith means to them, what their actions mean to them. And it's really good, juicy narrative stuff.
It seems like Castile is a great setting if you're looking for a type of story where when it's dealing with the like ethics, moral, and religion of a place. Do you find that to be so? Do you think is there anything outside of Don Quixote that we talked about that you could use that for this setting to help flesh it out?
Oh, one of my favorite parts from the book is they also take some the writers took some inspiration from the Scarlet Pimpernel with El Vagabundo, who is not just one person but a society of mask-wearing heroic characters, which one day I might use. But I just love the idea of throwing in like a Spanish Scarlet Pimpernel who pretends to be hapless nobodies who then foil cruelty every chance they get. So Scarlet Pimpernel is also a great source of inspiration for not just Castile, but anything 7th Sea, really. It really fits in that narrative very strongly.
To piggyback off of that, Mask of Zorro gave me a lot of El Vagabundo vibes. And then also a lot of Castile is based off of family. The mother comes first. Like in the 3 rules, it's like you follow your family, you follow your mom, and you follow God. And that is what you do. That is to be a Castilian. And so whenever we go and visit Castile, if my Castilian player does not go visit his mother's, there will be hell and high water to pay because his mothers love him very much and want to tell the entire township of Aldana that, oh, my son is home. And the whole community comes together and it's this big family, we don't, you're raised in a village kind of deal where it's just all about who you are, where you come from, and your lineage. Because a lot of Castilians also have very, very, very long names.
Yes.
All right. So, is there any last words before we jump into Montaigne?
I don't think so.
Not off the top of my head, no.
Not off the top of my head.
All right, that's totally fine. Let's jump right into Montaigne. Now, I felt like this is the opposite problem with Castile. While Castile, I feel like there's not enough media to portray it. There's a lot of media, but based on like French culture and mythology and fashion and everything in our society. Three Musketeers, a bit of Scarlet Pimpernel, Monte Cristo. Count of Monte Cristo, Victor Hugo. So yeah, this is a very well-known setting. So what would you say is like your favorite parts about this section of the book?
This is this entire section of the book screams Les Mis at me. And I mean that in the book sense and in the play sense, because it is just it is pre-revolutionary France, and it is also, you know, Three Musketeers France. You know, it is both of those meshed together, and also the magic is nutso. It's so good, but it's also so one of the
terrifying.
It's terrifying, and it has, just like with Avalon, and we actually didn't touch upon it, but Castile has alchemy, which is also cool. But one of the most scary and most overpowered and terrifying magics comes from Montaigne, and it's blood magic. You basically just cut your hand, you open a portal in the world, and by opening a portal, you're also cutting the world. You're causing a wound in the world, and then you walk through that wound to another portal. It's doorway magic, basically. But if you don't take care of it, it's basically eldritch horror unleashed, and it's just terrifying. Like, I love and hate Montaigne. I love to hate Montaigne.
Yes, agreed. The Porte magic is incredible. We've had a player who dove into that, and just the description even from this book and the core rule book about the portals, where like you hear screaming and it's just darkness, and you have to
can't
it's
open your eyes. Don't open your eyes.
You have to make sure you close it behind you. You don't want to get locked in.
You don't want to let anything out.
No, yeah, absolutely not. And to jump onto Les Mis, this very same player completely based his character off of just Les Mis in general. He actually, I love him and hate him for it, but he almost directly references quotes from Victor Hugo's book and from the musical.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, Montaigne seems like as a player and just my experience, it's a great way to access high stakes choices. Like I played with a Montaigne player who just was like a social character, but she was social high stakes at all times, because it was like reputation in the like Montaigne courts was so important. So we had the high stakes like social court lady, and then we had the high stakes like farm boy who had Porte magic because of like blah 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 backstory. But both those characters had access to such high stakes narrative choices, because Montaigne is just built to give you access to either magic high stakes or social high stakes, which both of which were I'm a narrative girl. I love a good narrative. So like, which I think 7th Sea really speaks to, and just the different nations give you access to different kinds of, just, I say it again, but juicy narrative choices. So, but some of the funnest like social like to get to experience Montaigne's social interactions was like, whew. Oh, they're not fighting, but they are fighting.
It's not about the duel.
It's about passive aggressiveness. Yes. Yes.
So is there any like either favorite settings in this section? Is there any NPCs or any characters that you made that were your favorites?
Oh, yeah, please, Zoe, if you want to go first.
So I have a favorite and I have a hatred. In the game that I started playing in, we had a villain named Michel Dupé. And the very first interaction was he was in a tavern somewhere, and they described him as this, you know, all Montaigne kind of have this like highbrow nose, like frou-frou-ness about them. But this guy, when he closed his eyes, he had eyes painted on his eyelids. And we all thought that was super creepy. And we all were completely correct, because 3 seasons later, he has become our big bad, because he has taken over Montaigne, dethroned l'Empereur, and called himself the King Beyond the Ways. and has shut off every other Montaigne person who has the ability to use Porte from using their magic, which is terrifying. So we hate him. But also in my podcast, you will meet Cosette, the purser of La Rosa Blanca, and she is a Montagnese who has the ability to use Porte, but unfortunately she lost her leg in a Porte accident, and she treats it very differently than most other people do. Her blood is precious to her, and so she will not spill it unless absolutely necessary. And that's, the kind of dichotomy of it. You've got your bad mages who use it willingly and don't care, and then you've got your good mages who are like, no, we're hurting the world every time we do this. So there's
Love
that.
I too created a recurring antagonist from Montaigne and utilized a location for this character. The location is actually in this book. It's La Motte, where it's depicted a massive cliffside, where at the very bottom of the cliffside is like the shanty town, like where the fishermen are, where the ne'er-do-wells live. But then if you make your way up the cliff, that's where the high society lives, and there's giant estates and manors that just sort of look down on the poor, which is such a great emphasis for the country proper, because it's just the parallel between the very poor and the very rich is just so extreme. Yeah. And La Motte depicts that perfectly. From that, we had who I just called her the Duchess La Motte. And she was a very great social villain, especially because we had the two Montaigne characters dealing with her. And yeah, on one end, she was great to have just this on the surface was just having a big gala and a big event, inviting all these people from across. Where on the other side, she was doing, shady business in the back and basically could shatter people's reputation just by, ruining them at an auction. And then ended up becoming hell-bent on destroying our Montaigne courtly lady throughout the rest of the campaign, because of literally at a point I heard my player mutter something, I muttered a jab at this character, and I utilized a danger point so that it was heard, and it completely capsized their plan. Because she just couldn't help but hear it, and my player couldn't help but just say one scathing thing. And with the Montaigne, you say the wrong thing, it can upend the entire adventure.
That's all it takes.
Very spicy. So yeah, Montaigne, great. And La Motte was my absolute favorite geographical place to use.
How about you, Stephanie? Did you ever make a character from here, or is there any NPCs that stood out to you?
I have not. Just like another player character, I love the character that Michael is referencing. Her name is Lady Maines, and she just getting to see a social character really excel and really get to still play such a huge part in the narrative and still have such high stakes and still get into as much trouble as you would get in as if you were a combat character is so deeply satisfying for storytelling purposes. So as a consumer of like 7th, I love experiencing, seeing, and consuming Montaigne because it's juicy.
All right, excellent. Is there any last words before we jump into the fourth country?
Other than, again, calling back to the monarchy, they portray l'Empereur as this powerful being, and he rules all of Montaigne and everything. He's actually weak as fuck. He's losing his magic and kind of going a little mad, and they don't want anybody to know that. They want everybody to be, oh no, the l'Empereur has everything under control, everything's fine, when behind the curtain l'Empereur is like, how do I get my magic back? What is happening? I need help. And it's really great because the way how the books are structured is that the heroes can interact with l'Empereur as easily as they can interact with any other NPC. It's not like, I'm not going to name any names, but Vampire the Masquerade, where you can't interact with the Duke of some station because he'll just kill you. Like, he's too powerful, he's too well known. Whereas 7th, you can go talk to Queen Elaine whenever you want. You can go run into Lamberer on the street. Like, it's all about what the player wants to do and how they want to interact with the world. And that's just another avenue. If you want to save Montaigne, go talk to Lamberer. I think he's got a big problem.
I think Zoe really hits it on the head. The great thing about Montaigne is like this, what perceived status versus real status. Like the Emperor is up here perceived, but really he's like down here. And you could have a character who has a huge perceived social status, but is actually like way low socially. And so the status interchanges versus what they're perceived as in Montaigne is such a fun thing to play with and gives lots of drama. So that's a good point.
Gossip is better than a sword in Montaigne.
Yeah.
That is like the way I look at them. You could spreading a rumor is better than poison. Like it's very
if it's good poison.
Or if you pick the character choice that poison is, you're immune to it.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So the last one, I'm going to need someone's help because I always, it seems like every time I pronounce this country's name anywhere, someone I always get corrected and I always say it the wrong way. How do you pronounce this country's name?
It is pronounced Vestin Manavinyar. The way how I remember how to pronounce it is to instantly put that accent to it. And so whenever I'm talking about Vestin Manavinyar, I always put an accent to it because it helps me remember how to pronounce it. That's
incredible tactic. I will be utilizing that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Vestin Manavinyar.
Vestin Manavinyar.
That's excellent. Thank you for sharing that. So this part of the world is always difficult for players, at least the players I play with, to use because I think they're not as familiar with it as I. Now, when I first saw it, like a few years ago, I was like, oh, okay, and I just put it in the back of my mind. But I've noticed that it's more role-playing games that's sort of based on this part of, like, based on the mythology of like Sweden and Norway, like Vestin it's very popular among role-play, especially if you like horror. And there's some other ones coming out. Even there's like interesting creators like Morkborg, if you like really that dark heavy metal type of role-playing, that's from creators over from that part of the world. So now that I've been more exposed to that and then looking at this again, I'm like, oh, I get it. I see the fascination with this part of the world. So let me pass it back to you. What are your thoughts about this section?
What I love about Vestin is not only do you get that lore, do you get that history of like Norway, Sweden, the Viking raiders and things like that, but you also get some of the most powerful like economy characters because if you, from this book and the original book, Vestin is like, they've cornered the market in just money in general. It's the hub for all the guilds. They use the main currency. So like, what is the phrase they use in the book? It's like they've pounded their swords into coins. They're still dominating the seas and things like that. And they are, I love I've used like some one-shot seas moments for my players, utilizing some of the guilds. I think that those are some great opportunities to like see some crazy characters. And also they have some of the most savage duelist maneuvers I've seen.
Yeah, they're nasty. Absolutely nasty. When I was first introduced to it, I was basically given, like, someone showed me the map of Theah, which you can see in the background here on my wall. And they're like, hey, I'm going to describe to you everything that you need to know in a couple of sentences. And they pointed to Vestin Manavinyar and they're like, all right, so Vikings did to the world what Europe did to the euro. They now entirely own all of the world's money. And also there's rune magic. And I'm like, I'm sorry, what? And he's like, yeah, no. So they follow the Allfather, which is totally not Odin. And I'm like, all right, I'm sold. I'm sold. You don't need to say anything more because my background is theater and it's also mythology. And so I did a major with a lot of the Norse mythology and, Yggdrasil and all of the world was Niflheim and all of that stuff. And I'm like, oh my God, there's rune magic. This is great. So you don't need to say anything more because it's fantastic. And then you still have in Vestin you still have the people who are of the old traditions of like, I'm going to go to the sea, I'm going to be a Viking, and I'm going to steal everything that I want to do. And you're not going to tell me otherwise. And then you've got the Vendel League, which is like, now, hold on. We can do it better. We can do it with tariffs. And they're like, wait a minute, hold on. And so it's really this, it's a peaceful nation on the front. You know, you see it and you're like, oh, it's not at war with itself. Like, it's not really at odds with other nations other than Vodachi, but we'll get to that later. But there is that, you know, old world tradition versus new world order kind of deal. And so there is that dichotomy, that conflict superseding on top of all of the weird lore of like, there's trolls and there's you know, there's all sorts of like the white witch is out there, which is really cool. And it's just it's a world that if I were to go to Iceland and Sweden and Norway, that's how I would depict it in real life. It's like there is this ancient culture that it was built off of, and they've kind of transcended it into the modern world, but all of those ancient things are still there. You just got to look for them.
Is Vestin, Michael, is Vestin where we did my favorite one shot of all time?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, it was very rich. There was just like this weird, it was like a warm up for the podcast. We did this just like brew competition, and it was like this weird like anime episode, but it was such a rich like background to have this like odd competition where each character in like this drinking hall had to compete for something that Michael tailored to the character. But the
apologies, that's
is that the chinchilla? Okay, sorry. Yeah. But having the like, you know, Valhalla drinking hall, proving yourself in that environment was such a rich backdrop for that, you know, experience. It was one of my literal favorite things I've ever done as a role player, and it was just like really goofy and silly and fun, but I think because of like the rich background and setting that it had, it clicked and worked. And the characters that showed up, because, you know, Vestin is, you know, so central for trading, you can have everybody can be there. You can get characters from everywhere there to do whatever business it is that they're doing.
For anybody that used the setting to create characters, NPCs, or even locations, was there any outside inspirations to help you out in any way?
Very recently, I'm drawing a blank on the name of the show on Netflix we've been watching.
Last Kingdom?
The Last Kingdom. I've taken a lot of that culture and utilized some of the ways of the Danish warriors, which are very, very Nordic in their culture and things like that. And a lot of and also I like you, Zoe, I'm a huge nerd when it comes to like mythology. I just very recently read Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology take, which was very, very enjoyable. Loved it. And yeah, I've created a couple of different antagonists, both which have been great for my players to be terrified of. And then also I created like this super cool NPC character, sort of like that one that threads all the characters together. And I made her own fleet and things like that, just as this badass retired warrior type character. And yeah, between all of that and pulling it together just from just the nation of Vestin, just being, like you said, like this old world that has come into the new, stronger on so many avenues. And it's just, yeah, I absolutely love it. And it's made some really great characters for me to throw at my players.
So not only did I take a lot of inspiration from Neil Gaiman and from a lot of the Norse mythology, I took particular inspiration from the 13th Warrior, which is a fantastic film. I highly recommend all of you going to watch it if you haven't watched it already. And it is just, and I've also taken inspiration from like real world economics. And again, I reference how Europe did with the euro. I was over there when that was happening. I actually left right when the transition happened. And so when I was living in Germany, the mark was turning into the euro. And there was a lot of a lot of animosity because they were like, oh, how is this going to affect our economy? How is everything going to, like, the trade system? How is, like, all of this going to happen? And there was a lot of like hidden conflicts just revolved around money. And unfortunately, like, some countries didn't really make out very well. But I took a lot of that, like my own personal interaction with it, and put that into my Vestin. And so my Vendel League does have some corrupt people in it. One of my characters came up to me. He's like, hey, so I want to be from Vestin. And I'm like, okay, cool, awesome. It's like, I want to be like a detective. And I'm like, oh, a detective. Okay, okay. And he's like, picture this, Chief Inspector of the Vendel League. I'm like, sold. Bet. I don't care how we do it, but yes. And so I have a chief inspector who deals with all of the trades and all of the tariffs and all of that stuff. But on the down low, he's like your gumshoe character, you know, your Dick Tracy. He's like, there's nefarious things going on here, and I'm gonna uncover it. And so like all of that corruption seeded into the Vendel League is there. You just have to find it.
A one-man Better Business Bureau.
I just love whenever a DM responds positively to a player coming in and starting it off with, picture this.
I'm like, I'm sold. I'm here.
Yeah.
We're in the theater of the mind. Here I am. Front row seat.
It's a good way to start a character pitch.
Any last words about this section?
Again, it's back to the monarchy thing. There was a king a long time ago, you know, died, and nobody really took over the throne. And so the Vendel League have kind of done that. And there are guilds that are specific to that. But each guild has, you know, either a corrupted villain running it or a good heroic NPC running it. And everything, like everything else in the world, is on a knife's edge. And all the players have to do is just tip it one way or the other, and they can find whatever it is that they want to find within the Vendel League. And even out in the world. Like, we keep talking about the Vendel League. Vendel League is only one small little area in the whole of Vestin and Avignon. Like, there's so much more. There's port towns. There's the Vestin Raiders, which are the old world Vikings, like literally have the ships and everything. Like, you know, and then there's the Seekers of Ekarilla, like the making of the runes, which is all about balance. And it's just it's so good. Like, the whole thing is great. Don't if I were to give any advice to people playing in Vestin and Avignon, make sure you get out of Vendel and explore the rest of Vestin.
One last question to all of you. All right, would you recommend this book for 7C role players, and if you do, why?
I absolutely would recommend it for 7C role players, not just GMs, but also players, because it has a lot of knowledge in the nation itself. So especially if you're going to be playing a character from that nation, it gives you a lot of things involving places that are important, people that are important, such as like the monarchs that you're going to run into, the higher up to-dos, and even some ne'er-do-wells. It gives you a couple of different advantages and things like that, but it gives you all of the dueling that comes there, that delves deeper into the magic. It really gives you that, like the core rule book kind of glosses over everything and gives that hook of like, oh, I really want to play someone from Eisen. That sounds really cool. Or I really want to play someone from Avalon. But then you go and you purchase this book and you realize there's just so much more. And if you're the kind of player that really loves lore and really loves learning where your character is from, I highly recommend getting that book and all of the books. Honestly, they're all great.
Couldn't agree more. Both as a GM and as a player. Yeah. Your players, like, there's so much nourishment of lore, and like, yeah, the core book gives you like a couple of hooks, whereas this book just takes that one big hook and splits it into so many, from locations. If your players are looking for, like, they want to have some big NPCs in their backstory or things that they want to go towards with their own personal story, this is a great source for that. Like, oh, maybe you are tied to this character and what's going on with them. And yeah, I think it's just so much extra extra spice to throw into the character. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it speaks to the reason I love 7th so much is that it's such a free system to roleplay in because it's so hard to die that you can put yourself in such stressful situations. And the books, like for me, I don't know every piece of lore ever, but I do know that like if I build a character, I want to know what is important to my character, what ties them to the world, so that my GM can put that in jeopardy, so that they can build the stakes. And it really helps if everybody's on the same page and informed. So it could be like just a couple things from that book that you find that are really like set you off and be like, that's it. That's the hook for my character. That's what's important to them. That's what I can put in jeopardy. And that's what I can play with to develop them and build their personal story throughout the narrative. Mm-hmm. And the pictures, I'm going to say the pictures are great. They really went off. They really said gay rights in these books. And
yes, they did.
Yes.
Yes, they did.
Yes, they did. Finally.
Oh.
Excellent. Well, viewers, thank you for taking time to listen to our discussion about 7th, the Nations of Theah, Volume 1. Before we wrap up, would each of you like to reintroduce yourselves and share the podcast that you're a part of?
Sure. Do you want to go in reverse order?
Sure.
Okay. Once again, I'm Michael, and the podcast I'm a part of is Bits Before Crits. You can find us on most podcast stations and our website as well. We also have a Twitch channel where we've been streaming a whole bunch of different content, but 7th is one of our long-standing campaigns.
Yes. Hello again. I'm Stephanie. I play on the 7th stream, which is twitch.tv/bitsbeforecrits every other Wednesday, generally speaking. And that's it.
And I'm Zoe, aka the narrator of the Writer's Room, a 7th podcast, where we not only tell the stories of 7th, but we also teach you the game. And I am also the curator of 10 Quills Dice, a D10 only dice shop for all of your D10 needs, especially for 7th.
I will be looking that up immediately. I'm tired of fishing around for unmatching D10.
I hate it. I hate it. That's my pitch. Are you tired of searching for your other dice sets for D10s? I am too. I have a shop drop in June, and we post every bi-weekly, every Thursday night for the podcast.
All right, excellent. I will put the links in the description below. Thank you all for joining this roundtable, and to our viewers, thank you for listening to us. Stay safe out there. Have a great day.
Bye, guys.
Bye,
be safe and well.
You.